Muy buenos días. Nos encontramos transmitiendo desde el Centro de Diseño Industrial en la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, UNAM, la primera parte de una serie de pláticas denominadas Pláticas desde el Laboratorio. Básicamente lo que vamos a hacer el día de hoy es tener una entrevista sobre electromovilidad y distribución de alimentos. Para esto, el día de hoy nos acompaña Beth Bond y Alejandro Saniger, quienes son parte del equipo de Bosch. Buenos días, Alejandro. Buenos días, Beth Bond. ¿Podrías introducirnos, Alejandro?
Hola, yes. Hi, Beth. Nice to see you again. Thank you for being here, and I'll do a brief introduction of Beth in Spanish. Beth la conocí, bueno, Alejandro, Beth y yo trabajamos en Bosch. Cuando entré, colaboramos juntos en el proyecto que se llamaba Hermes, básicamente viendo temas de movilidad urbana, nuevas posibilidades de negocios, relaciones con gobierno, con la academia, con startups, etcétera, para tratar de implementar nuevos esquemas o nuevas posibilidades que se pudieran encontrar con todo lo que es nueva tecnología en términos de movilidad. Y bueno, desde que la conocí me impresionó mucho, además de un gran don de gente, siempre muy interesada en el uso de la tecnología, pero sobre todo para aplicaciones que tuvieran un impacto positivo social, ¿no? Entonces, este enfoque, desde que la conocí, es muy claro. Creo que todos los que la conocen entienden esto perfectamente y me causó un gran impacto desde que la conocí. Entonces, ahora que estamos hablando de este tema de bicicletas eléctricas, ellos en Chicago han hecho un esquema del que nos va a platicar y pues me pareció muy valioso lo que nos podría contar al respecto, ¿no? Así que pues las dejo en muy buenas manos.
Okay. Thank you so much for being with us, Beth. We're going to start this presentation, which will last about 40 minutes or the time you need. And then we'll have a brief series of questions and answers from you, broadcasting alive. Thank you so much for being with us. So you'd like to share your presentation?
Yeah, thank you so much. So everything Alejandro said, I'm sure, is bolstering me up a little higher, but I really appreciate being here, just first and foremost, to share a little bit about the project work that we've done in Chicago. And I think the best place to start when it comes to solutions design is always at the problem. And so as Alejandro mentioned, a lot of the work that I do within Bosch is tracking how cities all over the globe, but specifically here in North America, move people and things. And when Alejandro and I started on our team together in Hermes, one of the assumptions or one of the projections for the future of urban mobility was really that people would not move as much as things do. And I think that we've really seen that in the world. Things are outpacing humans in travel for the past 5 years, even more, but especially as e-commerce has picked up. I think DHL, FedEx, they all track that there's about 50 million same-day package deliveries happening in the US today, and that number will double over the next 2 years. So 100 million same-day package deliveries. That's not just like package deliveries each day, that's same day. And so in urban mobility, people is a huge focus, the built environment is a huge focus, but the way that things move creates a huge amount of congestion on our roadways. We see, trucks and really huge vehicles that have very low visibility put right amidst, bicycles in the bike lanes and cars on the street. And the kind of safety issues that we're seeing are definitely big problems that we need to address. And, that's all before the pandemic hit and has completely changed the way that people live. So as we came into March of this past year, that's kind of where I want to start with our e-cargo bike pilot. As we came into March, we saw a huge amount of limited mobility problems. And that's for elderly populations, that's for people with limited mobility in general, but that's really where we always want to start when it comes to solutions design. Start at the problem. So pandemic hits, supply chains are interrupted, and even toilet paper here in North America was hard to come by. And so that's where we started with this. And at Bosch, I know that we have a bunch of different mobility-based solutions, but one of the ones that has been exploding, and in March I figured would be a really, really great value add to at least our Chicago-based ecosystem, was the bikes, the e-bikes that Bosch makes the motor, the battery, and the electric systems for, so that you have your little display panel. And so COVID-19, and then going into May and June, and civil unrest and kind of the social injustices that have come to the forefront, the systemic racism that exists across a lot of the systems here, really brought to light just the enormous disparity in access that we see for a lot of our neighbors. You know, we had people with limited mobility before, we had elderly who have kind of higher risk, but now you've got a whole bunch more people who, because of supply chain disruption, because of their limited access to transportation in general, are now really going without the most basic resources that humans need: food, produce, PPE, water, tech devices for our students who are now having to dial in at home versus go into a school. And within Chicago, we are actually the most segregated city in the entire US. And so we just have such a heightened amount of those problems. And so, you know, I have a school-age child. I have two, but my older one is in first grade in a Chicago public school. And in March, when the pandemic set in and schools started closing, the thing that really concerned me as a parent was that 350,000 students that attend Chicago public schools might not have direct access to breakfast, lunch, and dinner programs, which are, you know, the most basic need. So for students who would already face a barrier to getting food, now that barrier has doubled. That last mile might as well be 1,000. And so I had the idea that, well, what if for the community-based organizations that are propping up our most resilient supply chains, you know, houses of faith, mutual aid societies, community-based organizations, nonprofits, you know, organizations that traditionally don't have dollars to invest in new technology, but are the basis for resilient communities, resilient supply chain. What if they were resourced appropriately with the same technologies that last mile logistics players are leveraging for sustainable, efficient, low cost last mile delivery? And so I started calling around to a few organizations within Bosch. You know, there is a really great, you know, Bosch's logo is invented for life. And so, you know, this would be a really, really great problem to tackle, I believe. And so I got a lot of affirmative response within the ranks of our organization from our e-bikes team, who connected me with a few of our bike partners at Turn and Trek and B-Cycle. And everybody was really, really jazzed about this idea of making sure that community-based organizations were resourced with some technology or, you know, sustainable vehicles for resource delivery. And so we were able to get 3 dozen of those e-cargo or e-bikes to Chicago, specifically for resource distribution. Schools are really hard because of all of the compliance and regulation that goes into, you know, who you have dispatched to serve students, young people. So we weren't actually able to immediately go straight to school food delivery, although we did some pilot runs with that, where food is being set up, produce is being set up, and people are coming to there, can really create some efficiencies by leveraging e-cargo bikes for, you know, each one of those stations. And so as we're looking at solution development, it's so important, especially when we're dealing with communities who have faced such a huge amount of disinvestment, disenfranchisement, to make sure that they are the ones embedded, leading the real work. And so the solution that we had, e-cargo bikes, was put into their process, not kind of dictating to them what they need to do. This is a tool, let's see how you can use it. And so Block Powered is what we call the name of the initiative, because it is, you know, a community-led pilot focused on equity and resilience. So making sure that South and West Side organizations, equity is the key word there, making sure that they have the same level of access to tools, again, that last mile logistics players are using to optimize their supply chain anyway. So community groups, local retailers, public agencies, we found a collection of them really focused on the south and west sides of Chicago. So on our northwest side in Belmont Cragen, we have a huge number of public housing projects or public housing agencies. In Logan Square, we have a really, really great mutual aid society set up to deliver essential food and different resources. North Lawndale on the west side and Englewood, they are both a part of some of our more targeted communities for high violence. And they have some really interesting ways that they've been able to leverage them. And then going down into the south side, we were able to find a number of partners that already had infrastructure set up and could really leverage one of these tools. And so a little bit more about those and the number of families and community members that each of those organizations serve. You know, it's not up to the initiative to create the community, it's up to the initiative to make sure the community is resourced. So just a point there. And so what we got is 12 of these e-cargo based bikes. So e-cargo bikes manufactured by Tern with Bosch technology. They can go up to 20 miles per hour at top speed. They are pedal assist, so they're still class 1 vehicles and still can kind of abide by all of the regulations and ordinances that are set by the city for class 1 vehicles. They can pull up onto the sidewalk. They do not require a helmet in the event that, you know, some organizations have multiple volunteers. We were able to get a startup who has a food ordering app to provide that for free to our organizations in the event that, you know, they could optimize their process a little bit more by tracking who their food was going to instead of just setting up a stand with a bunch of potatoes and a bunch of bread and chicken and, you know, all of these essential pantry items that they're setting up for. Maybe now they can get a little bit more tracking and data behind that, because if there's anything funders love, it's tracking and data to show your social impact. So we were able to get that from a local startup. We have not yet implemented the e-vans, but there's a startup here in Chicago Circuit that is able to do that coming into the winter months if organizations are able to continue their work. We added some data tools to each one of the e-cargo bikes because the kind of information on the south and west sides when it comes to bike infrastructure is really going to be different than what we have on the north side of Chicago or the central part of Chicago, which are very, very well resourced. They are more affluent communities. They have, you know, a higher amount of income tax dollars coming in. And so the city has built a really, really great amount of infrastructure for bikes, but not necessarily on the south and west sides. So what we did on each of the bikes was we affixed a sensor, a Bosch, it's called a transport data logger, and it is used mostly to track parcels in transit just to see what kind of conditions they met on the way, you know, temperature, humidity, tilt, and shock if they experienced any, like, you know, huge impact. And so we affixed some of those to each of the bikes in order to really gauge what is the quality of infrastructure for public roads in the different communities that we have them dispatched. Are they seeing a huge amount of potholes as they're traveling? So we can set, you know, minimums and maximums for each of those values so that at the end of our pilot, which is almost coming to its end, we can then pull a lot of that data off of the e-bikes and really provide it back to partners who are interested in, you know, what does road quality look like? We have a few sensors coming onto bikes as we kind of elongate the pilot that will start to give us GPS positioning, some air quality data, and then of course some additional cargo capacity. We got a bunch of burly trailers that we could affix to the cargo bikes so that that increased capacity load. So each one of the e-cargo bikes, I don't know if I said this, carries up to 400 pounds, and then an additional burly trailer gives it another 300 to 500. And so those are the tools that we were able to implement. And again, back to the pilot communities, the kinds of things that these organizations were already delivering was food, PPE, school supplies have been really big now that we've come back into the school year. You know, restaurants and their hyper local efforts to do delivery to neighbors, fresh produce from our urban agriculture. And some of the organizations were actually handing out like gift cards for rent and groceries and stuff like that. So they needed a really, really easy last mile vehicle that didn't cost, you know, the person who was driving it to go fill it up with gas. And so those are the kinds of resources that we initially charted out in terms of what people were distributing across the community and provided them the e-cargo bike at a little capacity for that. Along the way, I will note that we actually received additional e-bikes with less cargo capacity, but as we were tracking the use cases that organizations were leveraging the e-cargo bikes for, it wasn't necessarily all about the distribution of resources. What I've really learned over the course of this pilot is, yes, e-cargo bikes are great for food delivery, for resource distribution, for last mile logistics, but e-bikes in general are really used for community development. I think the amount of access that has been limited in specific communities, to be candid, the amount of trauma that is attached to mobility in specific communities really prevents kind of the adoption of a two-wheeled vehicle in Chicago, at least. We have in areas where there's higher violence, it's not as safe to ride a bike around. But community-based organizations, especially after social unrest and a lot of the protests kicked off here, they started using e-bikes kind of as a statement, a community development tool. They organize huge and well-attended bike rides within the community so that they can show neighbors coming together. They can show them on the streets, taking back the streets, unity rides, love rides. It's really been such an incredible thing. I was not anticipating to see how bikes can be used for community development and community building. We have seen over the course of the pilot, which started in May, this is kind of our staged approach. So in May and June, we did kind of a calibration phase. We initialized, who is getting it, who are our partners, what is the training process that we need to make sure people go through in order to be hitting the streets in a really safe way, understand kind of, we have a feedback loop that was set up in the event. We affixed a little QR code to each one of the bikes in the event that somebody who was on the bike ran into a problem. They could really quickly scan the QR code and it would bring them to a feedback sheet where they could say, do you need help? Did you have a really great experience? They could upload media so that we could start to collect some of the more contextual qualitative data around how the pilot is going versus kind of what are the metrics that it's putting out. They can track the miles that are tracked on their bicycle. They can track any of the data from shock and tilt and temperature and humidity, and kind of set up like, what is our social awareness and PR strategy so that we can get more organizations into the pilot. So that was May and June. Right at the tail end of June is when bikes actually hit the streets. And so we had our first trainings. We had 12 organizations come and pick up their allotment of bikes. And over July and August and into September, that was our deploy stage. We're actually still in that. Our pilot is going a little bit longer because weather has held out. In Chicago, we always joke that we stay during the winter for the summer, and sometimes the summer lasts longer, sometimes it doesn't. This year it looks we're hitting November and we still have some good temperatures on the calendar. So over that period of time, we've been doing some bi-weekly reporting. We've been looking at what are potential areas that could also leverage this kind of infrastructure. What are best practices for vehicle charging, data insights. We've been running a social campaign to highlight the organizations that are participating in the pilot and really, delivering the resources, developing their community with the use of the bikes. And we've been doing a couple of trainings along the way to get, new organizations trained on bikes. And then into September and October, we've kind of been doing like, okay, let's get some of the data back from the bikes. Let's figure out what does either the next pilot look like? How can our local bike vendor, who's been having to deal with some of the more maintenance and hardware issues, you put bikes out on the street and people don't own them, so they're going to ride them really hard. And when those bikes go up to 20 miles an hour, they're going to hit potholes. You're going to have kind of understood, okay, if this and technical training that we might, and I'll actually, biggest opportunity in my mind, especially when it comes to making sure that community is in, because, bike maintenance is a very niche community, especially here in this bike mechanic, certainly, right? There is a huge need for upskilling of bike mechanics to really understand electric vehicle systems and repair and maintenance. And so that's been something that's, I believe, a huge opportunity, trying to work out kind of what a pilot model looks like for technical training. But when it comes to the kind of funding opportunities that exist, the technical training component really has them there because it involves workforce development. You know, a technical training model that's 10 weeks that teaches somebody what derailleur systems are, what the brakes are, how to change a flat tire, you know, what is the electrical system, and how can you diagnose or run diagnostics on an e-bike. So that kind of program, there is a lot of funding, especially if it leads directly into a path for a job, a paying job. And so what I've been doing over the past maybe 6 weeks is really doing interviews with a lot of the logistics players, a lot of the bike share fleets, to understand, now that bikes are really being hugely adopted. We just passed public ordinance here in Chicago to say that within our bike lanes, not only can bikers be there, but last mile logistics players and their huge, you know, up to 4-foot wide cargo trailers can use the bike infrastructure coming into this next year as logistics players start to deploy micromobility vehicles. So now that we see that demand coming to the marketplace and it's being supplied by, you know, organizations like Turn and Trek and Bosch, how can we make sure that community is embedded in the job market to really maintain and sustain the bike share fleets, the last mile bike fleets? So Divvy is a local player that hires from training organizations. We have, you know, DHL and Amazon set to deploy some last mile micromobility vehicles on our roads. So it's really about tracking, how many jobs do you think that there are going to exist, and how could we develop a pilot that starts to do, you know, a virtual training model to support job development, to support it. So that's a little bit of, you know, what we've been doing over the course of our kind of tiered pilot. It's a 6 going into maybe 9 months. Some of the benefits that we've been tracking along the way, I've mentioned them throughout, but I think this is a really great slide if there is an organization really looking to set up their own pilot. These are some of the outputs that we've really been trying to track because they're important for organizations who might be funding some of these very specific benefits to take a look at. So environmental sustainability, for every mile of e-cargo bike delivery, that's a mile that we took from a truck or a combustion vehicle off the road. So we can start to look at reduction in carbon emissions, map need and demand. So we know how many masks are being handed out. We know how many loaves of bread are being handed out. But where are they going? And how many more of our neighbors are going without those resources? So mapping need and mapping the demand for different resources is a really important metric. Healthy communities, you know, eliminating the need for unnecessary travel and making sure that things can go directly to people's homes, especially as now we're seeing a phase 2 ramp up for infection rates here in the States. Here in Chicago, we are growing exponentially. So healthy communities is a huge focus. You know, e-cargo bikes are social distance friendly. They're just one rider, and obviously you're maintaining good distance with everybody around you. Economic development. So how many businesses were able to deliver food with these vehicles? How many chambers? We have one chamber of commerce who's our partner, who's been supporting local businesses with, you know, chamber services. So how many can leverage the ordering app? How many can start to create a sustainable consumer pipeline? Potholes and street conditions, we certainly want to make sure that we're mapping the public infrastructure. Route optimizations. So Google just, and this is when we have our GPS sensor on the bikes, we'll start to kind of map, especially for resource distribution, what are really great roadways that people can take instead of like running along very highly condensed streets. So route optimizations is a huge thing. Google actually just released a, if you're traveling by bike, route optimization. So that's a really, really great tool. They're safe streets. So not only replacing the heavy duty trucks with low visibility that are really contributing negative factors to our Vision Zero goals, but also safe streets, which is the thing that I really did not anticipate coming out of this pilot. Community development, neighbors riding together, making connections within the hyperlocal community so that, you know, you're looking out for each other a little bit more. You're making a statement that these streets are our streets. I think that's one of my favorite chants and protests is, whose streets? Our streets. And, you know, bike rides, shared bike rides are really, really such a great tool to show that in action. And then job creation. I mentioned that technical training and vehicle maintenance, it's such a huge opportunity that I think we cannot miss when it comes to rolling out a pilot. What is the next version of it? How is it bigger? How does it include the community at the heart of it? Because community, quite frankly, when it comes to, last mile logistics, is really cut out of the equation oftentimes. And we really need to hold e-commerce and logistics players much more into the community. We need to embed that. So job creation is a huge component. This is a little bit about, the different kind of inputs that we have and how they come into the center. We have a few data partners now that we're starting to get data back, who are supporting a little bit more of the insights that can be derived from the sensors coming off the bikes, the mapping of the demand, the partners that we're working with. So the different vehicles that we have, the communities that we're working with, the supply chain, the different resources that we're tracking. One of the use cases that have come out, which was really interesting to me as well, is as I was calling around the city of Chicago and different city offices, I connected with our DOT, and this was back in March and April. But one of the things that they had looked at this as a potential use case for was medical supply distribution. So we propped up in Chicago right at the early onset of the pandemic, a huge pop-up medical center at McCormick Place. It's one of the largest conference centers in North America, if not the largest conference center. But what we did there, we set up 500 hospital emergency room beds in the event that all of our hospitals got overflowed. And so what they needed, because you're supposed to be transporting a ventilator or medical equipment from this side of McCormick Place to this side of McCormick Place, you're indoors, so you can't really use cars. Golf carts are okay, but bikes are a really, really great way to do that. And so as we come into, the deployment of a vaccine, the deployment of rapid testing centers, e-cargo bikes and the amount of weight that they can carry, the fact that you're charging them instead of refilling them with gas, they're huge for medical supply runs. So that was one of the use cases that I thought was really cool. We also saw in communities, there's block clubs or community-based organizations that serve their specific neighborhood. They also sometimes will dispatch somebody to make a house call for medical purposes. And so these e-cargo bikes are really, really great for that. This is just a little bit, we obviously had to come up with some of the operational stuff. So legal, we had to make sure that any organization who was receiving the bike had signed off so that in the event something negative happened, which, we have not had throughout the course of this past 4 months, the partners would not be held liable. Funding, we were actually able to get every one of our partners to sponsor the use of all of our vehicles, all of our accessories, the technology. So funding actually was something that we were able to kind of underwrite just through in-kind sponsorship. And then strategy for, what does it look like for our reporting cadence? How could we handle maintenance requests? And so this is just a little bit of the components that were broken out. Again, this is the operational technical requirements and kind of how we got all of them taken care of. We did not, as a program, institute this last part with the neighborhood runners, but actually one of our organizations was able to create 2 full-time positions for delivery bikers. They're a food co-op on the north side of Chicago, northwest side, and they serve a huge amount of elderly and Section 8 housing organizations. So they deliver produce boxes. And because of the amount of need that they generated and the amount of funding that they have from partners who are dealing with food access issues, they hired 2 full-paying jobs just over the course of the first, I think it was 10 weeks. So that was a really, really cool thing. And let's see, and just ways that we feel over, the future of running pilots like this, funding opportunities could be addressed is through advertising. So it's kind of like the NASCAR model. I'm not sure if that's a normal term, but NASCAR model is basically branded sponsorship. So on the side of the bike, there is these huge e-cargo bikes, and it's great branding opportunity for an organization who wants to say, powered by organization name. This bag is delivering life, powered by, somebody. So advertising is a really great opportunity. Grants for workforce development, for COVID-19 relief, for foundations that are focused in food access. Grants are a huge opportunity. It is quite the undertaking to try to launch, a few dozen bikes out into the ecosystem. So, and we got all of it sponsored. So it was great not to have to go after all of the grant opportunities to support the work. But certainly if this was scaled, we identified a number of partners who are really, really looking to support efforts like this. Data is such, especially when you start to have route data, just the data off the bikes is valuable in and of itself. We had several partners that we work with at Bosch for curbside management, for, hub and logistics models ask us, like, could we see the data from the bikes just so we know, what are the road conditions like? And then this is one that we haven't explored completely, but carbon credits. How many gas combustion miles are you taking off the road? How many miles are you charging the bikes for? I know a few of the electric charging companies in the States, a huge part of their business model is based in carbon credits. And so that was just a note that we made. But that's kind of the end of what I've got here. I would love to answer any questions from anybody who has them about what we're up to, and maybe some of the work that you're doing locally. And maybe Alejandro, you can really quickly in 90 seconds say everything that I said in Spanish.
We have several questions now.
Oh, great.
On the chat. So it's been a very enthusiastic talk about this, because you should know that at the Mobility Lab, we're developing a local food delivery program, which is basically not only delivery, it's about production. So we're trying to link these small marketplaces where they deliver, healthy food. And now some of the students at the Mobility Lab are designing these bikes. And for more than 4 years, we've been working with Bosch on different programs. And this is probably going to be one of the next programs we will develop. So there is one question that I'd like to, how do you actualize your maps and the route conditions, how it has changed from having this data to make new routes? That's one first question. And another question that I'd like to do is, do you have one specific site or several sites in which people can enter and ask for these deliveries? And one third question is, what do you deliver the most? What kind of cargo things do you deliver? We're now basically thinking about food, but I'm sure you deliver more than food. You talk about medicines and other things. Those are the three questions that we have now.
Okay, wonderful. So to the first question around route optimization and public infrastructure, we're just getting data off of the bikes. We, unfortunately, the sensor that we have access to is not kind of like reporting up to the cloud and in batched time sets. So we have data coming off of bikes. It will inform, hopefully, the ordinance that our city council passed just 2 weeks ago that allows logistics players to put their e-cargo bikes in bike paths. They did not really account for the technical specifications of bikes, and I don't think that they have really taken a view of road condition data. And so over the course of the next few months that we go into winter, it will be really great to kind of have quantitative assessment of different parts of the city and how potentially investment can be made by last mile logistics players, because it's certainly something that the city probably cannot absorb the full cost of. But if last mile logistics players are going to be deploying micromobility vehicles, how can they also support the expansion of safer or better paved bike lanes? So that information we hope to use for that purpose. It has not yet, been able to say, oh, we passed this funding opportunity, and now we have 20 new miles of bike lanes going into the west side. Not yet, but we hope that is an output. To the what types of cargo. Oh my gosh, it really is quite amazing. So educational programming is a huge part. So as schools have gone out and remote, organizers have had to figure out how can we deliver hands-on educational programming to youth. And so some will pack up an e-cargo bike with a bunch of art supplies and take it into communities, deliver it to students, and then do some sort of virtual training with art right? We have some schools who have been using e-cargo bikes to deliver the school-issued technology, so laptops, iPads. How can we make sure that students have routers for students who don't have connectivity at home, which is a huge amount of students? How can we make sure that just that basic router is delivered to their home and connected so that they have connectivity? So educational programming is one of those things. Yeah, medical supplies. So not only, PPE, but medical services can be delivered. So there's the things that can be delivered, and there's the services or the programming that can be delivered. So those are the two buckets. So the things and the programs or the development component. Like we said, youth-led bike tours are a really cool thing that has been kind of gaining steam and helping develop communities. So, not only things are being delivered on bikes much more, but I feel safe riding in the streets of Chicago on my bike right now because there are so many less cars on the roadways. And so it's been really cool to see how bikes can be used to, invite people from the north side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago so that they can get a bike tour led by a young person in their community. So people are learning about their communities much more because of bikes. We're making the streets safer because of bikes. And certainly food and, all of the traditional kind of essential resources are being distributed. But yeah, I would say community development is being delivered via bikes, medical supplies, and educational resources for sure.
Okay, there is one question related with transporting food. How do you prevent temperature problems or problems with the food that you might have to transport? How do you find that logistics? Because when you talk about last mile logistics, it seems like you have discovered a new world when we talk about electric vehicles. So when we talk about food specifically, how do you handle food? You specifically have bicycles for food, or you mix everything you have to deliver?
So we deployed the bikes to community-based organizations that have this as a part of their process. So we are not, Bosch does not have paid couriers that's going out into the streets. So each one of our community-based organizations, they certainly have compliance for food safety that they have to abide by. They have a process for getting food out. There's no I think some organizations have, put the e-cargo bags that we have on the turn bicycles, they've got some little ventilation holes in them in the event that, you have ice in there, it can leak out as you're riding. But, it's really up to them how they're kind of controlling that side of it. This is a great tool that you can use, put it into your process and, let us know how we can support. That's kind of been from my side as the operational overseer, how we're making sure that we can just support organizations in their efforts.
Excellent. Has the range of the electric bicycles been a problem to deliver things? Or
That's one of the really cool things is, you have factory specifications that say per battery, you can go X number of miles. Actually, we're seeing organizations are giving us feedback on the Turn bicycles specifically, the Turn GSDs that we have. They have the range is incredible because they have 2 batteries. And so over the course of, the past, I guess, 8 weeks that some organizations have been working with them, we've had to transition them a few times as organizations are, they've dealt with what they need to deal with, and thank you so much for the bike. Now we can pass it on to the next organization. Some of them have not had to charge their bike in 8 weeks. They have gone over 150 miles for their ability to carry charge. So yeah, it's been really cool to see, like, the Bosch says our battery can last for up to 50 miles. Sometimes it lasts for way longer. I think it really just depends kind of how heavy are you packing it. So we've seen range is incredible on our Turn bikes.
excellent. Now we have some questions about the air quality. It says, have you optimized some routes depending on the pollution of some areas, or is it just data that you're just gathering now?
Right, we're gathering data. The data analysis component is something that, for anybody who's taken data sets and tried to find insights from them, especially for air quality and route optimization, that's going to take a little time. And we're hoping that, partners that we have across the city of Chicago, there's some really cool air quality open data sets that exist as well through the Array of Things project. If anybody has not heard of the Array of Things project when it comes to mapping air quality conditions, I would encourage you to look up, I think it's AOT, arrayofthings.com or arrayofthings.github. Anyways, there's a whole GitHub repository. And so partners that are already in the air quality vertical, really studying how air quality is affected by either industrial corridors or delivery and last mile logistics. That's going to be really interesting to see how it's thrown in there.
Okay, what are the kind of organizations that receive vehicles? What do they need to be? What kind of NGOs or what kind of community-based organizations have you found are more close to get these vehicles or to make this logistic?
Yeah, it's really organizations that have already been doing a little bit with bikes, because we are in the midst, 2020 is like such a crazy year that I would not be surprised if alien motherships just beam down today. Like it's such a crazy year that anything could happen, right? And so we're very sensitive to the fact that organizations are having to deal with so many things every day that we weren't looking for organizations who would have to figure out a way to use it, right? Like they already have enough to deal with. They're trying to feed people, so if this bike is something that they can put into a process or very easily create a process for, then they would be a great organization. But if it's like, okay, let's figure out how, your organization can get this bike, find somebody to ride it, and then, train on a technical tool, like there's just not that much time with all of the craziness that this year is throwing. So the organizations that we targeted, they were, youth programming. Youth are really cool to just hop on a bike. Chambers of commerce that were already doing business services. We have a couple of groups. One is on the far south side of Chicago called We Keep You Rolling. And it's interesting to see there are legacy nonprofits who have existed specifically to build a bike culture on the south and west sides of Chicago. And so this was a really great bike. It was a brand new kind of, the bikes, the Turn GSDs are bright yellow, they're mango, but they're like rays of sunshine that are just kind of zipping around the streets. And so organizations that we targeted, there's really a mixture. We've done a lot of pilot runs with houses of faith and nonprofits that are doing distribution hubs, but then the ones who received the bikes are the housing agencies that already have a bunch of stuff to deliver, the community-based organizations that are already working on community development via bike rides. Yeah, those are the orgs that we really worked well with right at the offset.
Fantastic. We have talked about many things. You mentioned like disparity, social issues, delivery, community-led. And now if we were to talk about formal business, which have been in the area of delivery, things like Uber, like Didi or whatever, how's been the relation with these formal delivery companies, which are worldwide delivering a lot more than ever over this time?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's going to be really interesting coming into 2021. There have been about 15 e-cargo based last mile delivery pilots that have been spun up over the past 18 months by DHL and FedEx and Amazon. They have active pilots right now. I think it's in Miami, New York, Houston. There was one here in Chicago. There's Portland. It's interesting for last mile players because if they're going to make an investment in last mile delivery leveraging bikes, they have to do so in a market where you have like longevity, right? In Chicago, we're about to get slammed with snow and ice. We just had our first snowfall 2 days ago. And so right now is not the best time for a deployment for a pilot, but Q2 of next year, I promise you, we will see thousands of e-cargo bikes deployed by last mile logistics players. And the role that Bosch has there is really just to make sure like we're a parts provider, right? We have really, really premium, great parts for e-bikes. We have motors, we have batteries, we have electric systems for the displays and tracking data. But the last mile logistics players right now are working with their suppliers to make sure that at the time they're ready to deploy a bunch more bikes, they have the right ones. And so I think for e-bikes, our opportunity is to make sure that just the standard that we have for our systems is something that we can hold up. One of the vendors that we work with here in Chicago for maintenance of the bikes and changing out flats and doing diagnostics and system updates, they actually, as a part of their insurance policy, only carry Bosch bikes because the likelihood that they will spontaneously combust is so minimal compared to some of the, competitor e-bike systems. And so I think that's an opportunity that, all of the bike OEMs have, is to make sure that as last mile logistics come into the market, they're supplied with really quality products so that it's not cost prohibitive when they have to upgrade because they saw, a bunch of issues with the initial bikes that they rolled out.
You talk about training as well, and that's probably one of the most important things for the academic programs. Since we started working with Bosch, we started thinking we should train mechanics. But probably now with these programs, if you were about to start a training program, which is not only about mechanics, which are the main points you will suggest Bosch and other electric component service providers could start thinking about? Because in the academy, we probably can start thinking about how to fix small things. But if you were about to start a training program, what would you suggest?
This is where my mind, I can think about the training program all day. I'm so interested in, one, the delivery of the training, right? Because social distancing is a thing, especially now as we're seeing increased spread again. Bike institutes or institutes that have normally done this kind of training have gone either out of business or have shuttered because they have to go virtual. And really, that's hard. When you have to teach somebody mechanical skills, to do so just through a webcast, not so easy, right? And so actually I've been working, one of our internal units at Bosch does a lot of virtual and augmented reality training applications. And so I've really been just looking at, how could we potentially create a pilot training that uses VR and AR in order to expand or blow out what is the different component parts inside the motor. So I think VR and AR is a really interesting, and the market growth for VR and AR over the next 5 years, it's something like 25%. Like they expect that will be the delivery application for virtual training going forward, is leveraging those tools. So that's one aspect, is the way that we're delivering the training is really important. We have to think about that. And then having maybe specifically for bikes, bays or in-person settings set up for one person to go and clock a number of hours just getting hands-on education. So there's like a real world, but also potential virtual deployment that you could do for training. But the really exciting thing to me is that e-bikes are kind of the bridge from old mobility to new mobility at its core, right? Because you've got a bunch of hardware that used to just be, a dumb bike, an awesome, but a dumb bike. And now you've got electrical systems that you're entering into the equation. And so for mechanics who have the base understanding of how to bridge from a bike to an electric bike, really have a good foundation for bridging from a dumb vehicle to a systems-based vehicle, right? Where you have to start doing a lot of diagnostics, plug in the USB and do the diagnostics and start to see the readout and where the problems are. That's now a really good bridge for all of these, organizations that have been training mechanics. How can we bridge that to the new mobility ecosystem, which will have autonomous, which will have electric? In North America, California is kind of our trendsetter when it comes to sustainability. And their governor just announced that by the year 2030, there would be no vehicle on their roadway that was not electric, which is incredible. So when it comes to attacking this new world, this new market, e-bikes is a really, really great transition point. And it's a little bit less, overwhelming to think about learning how to fix an e-bike than it is learning how to fix a Tesla, So I think those are the things that I think about, how we deploy training so that we're still safe, but how it can also bridge into the other kinds of new mobility training that we certainly will need in order to sustain new mobility ecosystems.
Well, that will take you to another question, because usually producers of electric components and engines like Bosch have been doing some very specific components that should be designed with the frame.
Sure.
So as we understand, this question might probably be for both of you, Alejandro and Beth.
Sure.
What's the future? What's on the future of Bosch, thinking that if we see the history of vehicles, light vehicles, Tesla is being built completely in a factory, but bicycles are usually made out of components.
Yep.
So when you want to build a bike, you want to buy the components. That can't be done so easily so far when you think about one of the best engines, which is Bosch, because you have to design a complete frame. It's not an easy. Is it on the eyes and the future of Bosch to develop new components that could be part of assembling or reassembling any other bike?
It's an interesting question. Alejandro, I'll let you take a stab at it while I think.
No, as far as I know, I mean, Bosch has a very deep responsibility thing with all the vehicles that are being produced. So it wouldn't develop, I don't know, gadgets to retrofit existing vehicles. So that's something that normally Bosch doesn't do, because they want to guarantee all the quality on the products that have their name. So they normally wouldn't do that. I know that when there's a lot of people maybe interested in retrofitting bikes and doing things like that, but unfortunately, we take a different approach to that because of all the basically protecting the name of the company and to things that work properly.
Yeah, I think it's a good point around quality control, especially when you think about the fact that it's going to be transporting a human body, and you just want to make sure, we can't just attach random things that might not eventually work. Not that it's that haphazard of kind of a production process. There is an organization, Ceres, that Bosch does work with. Ceres is an organization that can work with kind of the more boutique manufacturers or designers that are looking at building their own frame. I know a ton of organizations are building their own frames right now, and I think it's really great. But I think that, if Ford and GM can't figure out the supply chain with their purse and build their own frame and figure out the market, then it's probably really, really hard. And so while I think it's really interesting to develop a frame for a bike and all of the different component parts that can go with it, what I think is the bigger opportunity as we look at last mile logistics is, if fabrication is the true outcome of that kind of educational curriculum, learning how to fabricate, then let's look at fabricating a brand new kind of trailer, right? Trailers are like exoskeletons. You just need the frame. Maybe you attach a sensor to it, so you're generating more qualitative data. Back to the question about how are you tracking the conditions of the food on the way to make sure that it maintained a temperature. Like, fabricate a trailer, because that's certainly going to be something that actually could go back into the last mile supply chain. If you figure out a really great one, whereas bike frames are, there are a bunch of organizations that are building the bike frame. The market is really, really fragmented, and I think that might be an opportunity above bike frame. I just had this conversation with the Chicago-based org the other day.
Okay, for just a couple of more questions before we finish. We have like 3 minutes. And it's been very incredible to hear about the different aspects. And there are some questions. Sandy is asking us if there is a specific site where information about these projects could be seen, or do you share this information just up on request? Is it available?
Yeah, because it's really just been kind of initiative that Bosch, Turn, and B-Cycle have been supporting. There's been a little bit of press generated around it just in order to get the word out that we're doing it. But, there's no central link that I can send you to, other than, we created an Instagram for it so you could see some of our community partners in action. And there will be a promo video that is shot. But because it's not, a business that Bosch is spinning up, or Turn or B-Cycle are, formalizing, it's just an initiative. Yeah, it's just kind of on an ad hoc request. So I'm happy to share this deck, maybe the updated one that has a little bit more specifics around the other bicycle that we've been using as well. Happy to share that out. But other than that, we're just kind of sharing some qualitative photos and videos from partners on our Instagram at Block Powered.
Excellent. And one last question for Alejandro. While having this world panorama of what's happening all over the world, because it's not only, it's Europe, they've been for a long way doing cargo bikes and promoting the Bosch components. What's your idea for the future of this light mobility, electrical mobility in the Latin American context? How do you figure out Bosch working with Mexico and within the Latin American context? We have different weather. Like when Beth was saying that the winter is coming, I was thinking, no, not here. So I was thinking it would be much more interesting.
Yeah, I think there are great opportunities in the future for micromobility, but I think governance from the city standpoint is very important.
Yeah.
Some cities have to lead the way and show how successful projects can be implemented. Not every city right now, especially in the Latin American context, maybe has the capacity to do it right now. We need some cities to lead the way. That could be Mexico City. In Mexico also, I don't know, Guadalajara is also trying to do some things in terms of new mobility and more sustainable mobility. So those are the kind of the big cities that need to show the rest how to do it. I know in other places in Latin America, some other cities are working on the same. So we need these cities to set the example, and then I think it can spread out. Because you have to do, 2020, I think it has been a year in which we've seen that we can change our behavior, because past it was very difficult to make people change their behavior. We were always behaving the same way, business as usual, and it was very difficult to make a real change. Now we notice that we can do that. So we have to, I think, use that momentum to bring more changes to our cities, to the way we move things and people, and do it in this better way. So I think it's a good moment for cities to start doing this. And from the point of view of Bosch, I think in Mexico in particular, I think we need to show that the bicycles, in this case, the bicycles that are one of the problems with the market to bring these things to Mexico is that the more expensive bicycles in Mexico are normally imported, while we produce bicycles, but they're normally the cheaper ones. So we need to start producing this kind of bicycles with more technology in Mexico as well, to create a larger market for the products to also be available in Mexico. So this is one of the kind of problems, to create this market and not only import bicycles. So I think we have to work with cities, and cities maybe could give like some kind of incentives to produce these bicycles in the country, so that we start producing them and import and having more. So I don't know, more supplies from all these engines and batteries and everything locally.
Fantastic. There are many things we should talk about closer, like the new free taxes for importing electric vehicles. Probably have heard about that in Mexico. It just started last month, and it's going to be ready for the next 20 days. And of course, the government thinks about big electric buses, but I believe we should start thinking our focus and thinking about bicycles, not only big buses. It's been a great interview. We have learned a lot, and we have probably more questions, but now we are running out of time. And this is the first series of different talks about the electromobility and green infrastructure we will be having. It's been a pleasure for us hosting all of you at the city channel at YouTube. This talk is going to be open for the next days or the next weeks or the next months. And the next week, we will have a different talk with Alejandro Saniger for some specific cases in Mexico City. Beth, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Experience.
Yeah, great to see all of you, and please let me know if there's any questions that I can answer after the wrap.
Well, thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Alejandro Sániger, a todos.
Gracias, Antonio.
Gracias, muy buen día. Con esto terminamos la primera de las pláticas desde el laboratorio. En este caso ha sido electromovilidad con Beth Bond, que ha hablado su experiencia desde Chicago, y Alejandro Sániger, ambos por el lado de la compañía Bosch, dedicada principalmente, en este caso, a la fabricación de motores. Muchas gracias. Que tengan muy buen día.
Adiós.
Gracias. Chao. Bye.
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.